So what we're going to talk about now is as a service. Okay, so what is as a service? So there are some terms out there. Infrastructure as a service. So this is it's kind of like storage, aka disk. It's also how should we say it? Um, it could be VMs, virtual desktop infrastructure, Docker containers. It's things that consume uh, like RAM and CPU. So you need to uh, traditionally have like an OS that does a network share to store some data. You can do all that as a service, infrastructure as a service. So what they're providing you is the servers you would need to implement a system, right? And so when they do that, they're giving you some disk, they're giving you some RAM, they're giving you some CPU, maybe they give you some GPU, depends what it is that you need. And that there is SaaS, software as a service, and so this is really where you get access to some functionality that you don't have, and that. So uh, maybe it's some processing or geoprocessing or geocoding or some network analysis. So traditionally, you would have to buy Arc Pro and then buy a further extension and that sort of thing. And so what it is they let you basically uh, uh, purchase that functionality, right? That ability to take some data, uh, load it, transform it, turn it into something else, and that sort of thing. And so that's what they're selling there. And so there's things in ArcGIS Online like geo enrichment and the ability to buffer and intersect polygons and those types of things. And so geocoding is a big thing of all things. I take it for granted, I guess, but there's a lot of companies out there, CartoDB and others, that their business model is on the number of views, which is more of an infrastructure as a service, people looking at your maps, looking at your data on disk, and then other people where you geocode some points for them. You turn some pseudo-spatial data into true spatial data. But you can extend that to any type of, I guess, functionality of a GIS, networking, geoprocessing, and that sort of thing, or even just processing attributes as well in that. So that would be software as a service in that. Um, and so that ability, analytics, I guess, would be another term we could throw in there to help clarify what's going on. Because that's what a lot of what analytics is the processing or geoprocessing, right? Functions that transform data in that. So make new data out of old data and that. Um, And so instead of you purchasing Pro so that you can, like I said, buffer some points or intersect some polygons, you can just, purchase that. The way every company does it differently. The way ArcGIS Online does it, they have a credit system, and they'll charge you so much per function per feature, and then if you want to buffer or analyze a certain number of features, you burn a certain number of credits. If it's more features, you burn more credits in that. And that's how the system, pays for itself. And then there's PaaS, platform as a service. And so how that usually manifests itself is you using that platform to create apps that become web apps or web mobile apps or apps that end up, on people's phones and tablets and that sort of thing. Maybe like something like App Studios, you go all the way where it's not a web app on a phone or a mobile web app on a phone. It's actually what we call a native application that you would go download in the Google Play Store or Apple Store to install it on your device. But you're instead of you installing all the dev tools and that, they give you often today a web-based environment where you can drag and drop a bunch of controls together, hook them up, and create an application from that. In that, so that's typically platform as a service, right? Infrastructure is just your, and you can look at it as layers too. Hardcore, you need some disk, some RAM to run everything, and then the software is really about functionality, and then PaaS is really about building an application in that. And they're not mutually exclusive, right? Platform would build an app that uses some functionality that hits some data. So, platform would probably use the other two for sure, infrastructure and SaaS. Lots of cloud companies out there, the big three, right? If we're talking about VMs, data, and ports. And ports, by I typically mean here some client server software. And the classic would be relational databases, Oracle 1521, 5432 for Postgres, 33006 for MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server. So the big three are Amazon. It's got an Elastic Cloud. It's got relational database services, Google Compute Engine, and Cloud SQL, and then Azure for Microsoft. In that, these are the three big players. If you need to get, some serious VMs out there in the cloud, there are lots of other shops that provide this service as well. But I got to mention the big three because those are the ones you're going to hear about. Of course, other notables like Citrix does apps and a little bit of files. They do a little file focus because, apps need files, that sort of thing. Oracle has its own, they're a really big database company. So, of course, they're going to have their database focus as well. It's not that they don't do other things, but, when you're going to Oracle's cloud initiative, then you're probably going to say, hey, can I have an Oracle database in the cloud? Because I don't want to install it and run it on my own stuff, right? Tons of container systems in that. So containers is kind of where you put an app, you isolate an app inside a container, and then you can run all these containers next to each other. Docker is very popular. Kubernetes is just like Docker on steroids, but there are also Linux containers, turnkey containers, which are based on Linux containers as well. In that, if you need like a home NAS, they've turnkey's got a NAS in a container. If you want a little web server, like they call it a LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, PHP, MySQL, they have a turnkey pre-configured app for that you can just drop in as a Linux container. The container technology is related, like Linux containers and Docker containers. Docker containers have Linux container roots, and that they're all slightly different, but they're all in this container kind of zone, right? And then it's up to you. Well, there's tons of people who host containers in that. You just need something running. Podmon, if you're on Red Hat, or something running even Docker to run a Docker container. Ranchero is another one, Kubernetes and that. So there's tons of people. You can go get the software yourself and become a cloud provider if you want. Lots of cloud companies that focus just on GIS. Mapbox, of course, CartoDB, and that. Crunchy Data. They get a real Postgres, PostGIS centric focus. They're also the people who built PG TileServe and PG FeatureServe, and that. So they'll do spatial, but you're in their database in that. And so they have lots of stuff for deploying your architecture out there on Kubernetes and that. And so it'll be all containerized. It'll work and that. And you can get all this other fun stuff as well. Cloud.js, there is a cloudjs.com and that. So they focus actually on mobile field data collection and that. So they have mobile apps, and they have a cloud architecture that you can save the data back to when you're out in the field collecting. And that a QGIS, they're more for spinning up maybe products like GeoNode. It could be on a VM, or it could be containerized as well, but they'll help you set all that up, and a GeoServer and a few other products. So they focus on that stack of GeoServer, GeoCache with a PostGIS backend. Sometimes they'll throw GeoNode in there as the front end, depending on what you as a client want and what kind of technology you want to adopt in the cloud. But again, these are companies that have that focus on, hey, we're doing spatial, we're doing maps, and we need to store data in that. Maybe we're doing OGC web services as well in here, or some type of REST-JSON that spits out GeoJSON as a standard, like standards-based stuff. But there's, like I said, lots of. This is just a few. This is not everybody in that. GeoServer and related products, like I was saying. In that, again, there's a lot of different companies out there, but these are some that I'm very familiar with. I bump into all the time. Mango is another one that deal with just, get a map in your app and that sort of thing as well. And many more. If the list could be endless. Be here for a few slides going over them all. So what is the linchpin to WebGIS, right? Just, there's all this stuff, and so what's going on, right? And so the linchpin is spatial web services, right? So it is the OGC web mapping service, web tile mapping service, web feature transact, right? Your web coverage services and your web processing service. This is what makes a lot of this possible. Or maybe you're an ESRI shop and you're dealing with ArcGIS Online, the portal, the hub, or maybe you're doing raw ArcGIS server. It's always a thing where if you're going to say have a model in ArcPro and you want to put that online for other people to use, usually you have to spin up your own version of ArcGIS server to host the geoprocessing service and that, because the credit system gets complicated and who gets billed in that. And so these are a lot of the ArcGIS services are REST JSON services out of the box. They can do OGC as well. And so those are REST and JSON. ESRI has their own JSON format. A lot of their services you can ask for GeoJSON in that as well. But it's these web services, right? That and that. And we'll talk about services and capabilities in some future slides. Okay, and there's so many of them. I might as well, I guess, jump into it. But there's quite a few, and so I'll try to say how this relates to the OGC. The OGC has like a one-to-one service versus capability. ESRI has a server, like a map server service that has lots of capabilities, but those capabilities usually line up with what one of the OGC's ones can do as well. So, and so we'll talk a little bit about ArcGIS Server. And these are ArcGIS Server services. Here's a list. I mean, the list grows and some are taken for default in that. The geocoding service. So if you have a really good locator in that, we take geocoding for granted, but to have precise geocoding and that it matters in that. So, and there's a service that's not on here that's kind of, I guess, it's called a geometry service. It's kind of installed by default on ArcGIS Server, but if you need to do some geoprocessing, like you don't want the client to do the buffering or the intersecting, you can send it back to the server to do that kind of stuff as well as in that. Geodata service, people checking in and checking out data, like they need to pull down a replica of a geodatabase and that sort of thing. Geoprocessing services, this is where you like make a model in ArcPro, but you say, hey, I got this really cool model, I want to share it with all these people, right? Geo event service, this is sort of like the real-time geo event processor. There's different triggers, I guess, the geo triggers and geo fencing, like you're tracking a vehicle and it enters into a polygon area or leaves it and that sort of thing, and you can I guess fire off a trigger, or that's the trigger that fires off the event. And that you can have there's lots of other ways to create these events and what actually caused an event to happen, and then you can decide yourself which of these events you want to respond to in that as well. There's an image service. Again, this really helps if you have a custom base map. It's all about the tiles and make the tiles really, really fast, but it can also do mosaicing. Like, do you want the web browser on your phone to do the mosaiced image, or do you want to send it back to the server, and when it's done, it'll shoot you an image with the mosaicing done, kind of stuff. They have this generic map service. It was one of the originals. It's been around forever. There's lots of stuff you can do. So the image server, you might go, well, what's the difference between the image service and the map service? They're both sending out images, right, and that sort of thing. Well, the map service was first, and the image service was like a redesign to make it really, really fast in that. So you can still have PNGs and JPEGs flying out of a map service. It can still be tiled as a map service, but if you want to really speed it up and add some more functionality, that's where the image server above takes over in that. Vector tile service, right? So we can have tiles, but now they're not images. They're like Mapbox vector tiles following that format and that as well. And so there's lots of different ways to chop up data and get it to you if your client can handle it. The big however, and this is like the list of services used to be much bigger, but then it gets into this capability thing. And so the real big however is these services have multiple capabilities. So to understand what does an ArcGIS server service, what can it do? We really have to look at the capabilities and that. Okay, and the capabilities are kind of what line up with an OGC service, right? So a map service can do feature service, can have the feature service capability. It can have the tile capability. It can have, the dynamic map capability. And we'll talk about that on the next slide or slides, because there's a lot of capabilities. Electronic navigation charts. You don't have to worry about this unless you are the American Navy or the Canadian Navy. So you don't even get to do this or look at these maps. Feature access. So, and this is, there's lots of ways to do this. The stock way is you turn on editing when you publish a service, so it's done via a map service. But feature access would be, the CRUD stuff, create, read, update for vectors, right? So we call it hosted feature services, and it's feature access where you instead of getting an image, you actually get the raw geometry. So you actually get the points, lines, and polygons. You get their vertices, their geometry. You get all their attributes, and then it's up to you to do, well, what do you want to do with that? That's up to you, right? And then it's the part is, well, is editing turned on? And what kind of edits can you do, right? Can you do ads? I think that's a technical term on the service. Can you do an ad? Can you do a delete, an update, that sort of thing? And the read is query or something in that. And so can you do geocoding? And so sometimes the capability is one-to-one even with the ESRI service, right? Geodata as well, geoprocessing we've seen before, imaging. This gets into this concept. Well, what is the imaging capability? It could be getting images, it could be streaming images, and it could also be doing mosaics and that type of functionality. KML is a capability. You're like, yeah, I like feature access, but I don't like GeoJSON. Our apps are all set up to get KML. Well, they have a KML capability. Well, we just, it's the same map server service, right, with KML turned on. And so instead of spitting out ESRI JSON or GeoJSON or protocol buffer format, you say, no, I want KML. So it shoots you KML in that. Linear referencing, mapping. This is the dynamic mapping, zoom over here, send me an image, right? Tile is different. Zoom over here, what are the tiles in this area? Send me the tiles. This is more of zoom over here, make an image. Okay. So I think we saw that in we saw that in the lab sample when we were doing like QGIS, map server. More capabilities, we haven't stopped. Network analysis, you're doing drive times, allocation, location stuff, traveling salesman, those types of operations on a network. Doing network diagrams, parcel fabric. This is very specific to ESRI in that. So they have a whole parcel fabric system of parcel polygons, parcel lines, parcel points, and you can do least square adjustments on them and that sort of thing. In that, schematics is where you're not even looking where you're more interested in how things are connected, not their exact, I guess, geolocation. So you're not really trying to map it out relative to other cadastral data or other data sets that are georeferenced. It's more of a visual, this is how things are connected. Right? Think of the map of train stops if you're on the SkyTrain. That is not accurate, right? So it's more of how these things are connected. Topographic projection, tracing a network, utility network. This is a new model that's appeared now in ArcPro recently in that. So there's all these different capabilities in that, and the capabilities are like down at the one level. The services are up at the many. So a service can do many capabilities. It all depends how the designers have designed it in that. Validation service. So this is a new one. This is interesting. We can have attribute rules now. So when we're collecting data, we can have all these constraints and rules and that. And so then we can send the data off to the validation service. It can check all the rules for us and then report back to us whether it, did it pass all the tests that we applied to it in that. And version management, that gets into more replication and checking data in and out. This helps at the collaboration level where you have lots of people working on the same data set making changes. Of course, an interesting capability is a lot of the services, if they're dealing with images or dealing with features, can run in OGC mode. So you can say, hey, I know you're an Easerai map service, but I want to turn on the OGC Web Feature WFS capability. So they handle almost all of the OGC services: web coverage service, web feature service, web mapping service tiled, and web processing service. So it's like an Easerai geoprocessing service, but the output is how you talk to it, and the output, how you talk to it is via OGC requests, and how it outputs data to you is via OGC formats and that. So it's taking that same service, but just running it in a different mode or turning on a different capability. You say, hey, I don't want that as Easerai JSON. Can I get that as, good old SOAP XML OGC web processing service? Oh, at the heart of the linchpin. This is good, right? So the heart of the linchpin is REST JSON, right? If I had to say, like, why does this stuff work, right? And that. And so in there, you can have ArcJSON. You can ask the service, give me to that in GeoJSON, protocol buffer format, which is binary JSON of one of the above, right? Or we can say, hey, go OGC style and give me SOAP XML, which means the data would come as GML and that. And so, or you could go SOAP XML and ask the OGC web service to return it to you as GeoJSON. I don't know why you would do that. Just go with the above. But the big thing is, why is this so important to browsers? And why does this work? And the answer is the data comes as text, right? And the browser can handle the text because it's Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP, and that. And so, even though one of those is binary, in that. So the idea is that it's text. The browser can handle the text. Your browsers are big enough already, and they are so bloated. But imagine if they had to know how to read and write shapefiles, how to read and write file geodatabases, how to read and write Postgres, Oracle Spatial, in that, MySQL spatial formats, Microsoft SQL Server spatial formats. They don't have to know any of that. They just have to know how to do text. And that middleware, the service layer, right, gets busy converting those specific binary formats, OGC geo packages, I'll throw another one in there for fun, converts it into text that the browser understands, ArcGIS JSON, because if it's one of their clients like ArcPro, ArcMap, or even the JavaScript, ArcGIS JavaScript API, they all understand Easerai JSON, but they also understand GeoJSON, right? Lots of clients, Leaflet and that, OpenLayers understand GeoJSON in that. So the heart of the system is that we get those, like I said, those very specific binary formats into a text format that the browser understands, or a binary format, protocol buffer format, that is one of these text formats in disguise that it understands in that. And the key to this, strange as it may sound, right, is that we convert all those spatial formats that we're used to working with on the desktop typically into a text format that the browser can easily digest. It's kombucha for the browser, maybe. That's one way to think of it, right? And the browser does love text. It's HTML, it's Cascade style sheets are text, JavaScript is text, JSON is text, 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 text.